diversity inclusion is important to you and meaningful to you. So Roy, why don't we kick off with you?
Sure. My name is Roy Dockery. I'm the Vice President of Customer Care at Swisslog Healthcare. We are a healthcare technology, material transport, medication management systems company here in North America. So I run our field service organization, technical support, scheduling, planning, and most basically everything post sales when we touch our customers. And diversity and inclusion is important to me because I think it gives you the best outcome as far as having a productive team and being innovative, and also being able to be able to offer opportunities to people from various backgrounds to have fulfilling careers. So.
Robin, you want to introduce yourself? Thank you, Roy.
Sure, thank you. My name is Robin Walker. I am the Senior Director of Customer Success and Service Operations for Mevion Medical Systems. We are a little unique in regards to our size. We're a very small company. We are in a high-end, very niche medical device company that develops proton therapies for fighting cancer. So diversity and inclusion is really important to me for developing a strong team and being very customer focused and customer centric so that we can obviously give our customers the number one white glove service that we can provide and really develop a network and opportunity for our service team. We have a service team of about 30. So a little bit about my background is I come from the clinical world. I am a clinical radiation therapist. So I bring the clinical focus to the service team, and that's how we really focus on customer success and driving that forward and how it really mirrors with the service operations team. So thank you for having me as a panelist.
Thank you. Carolyn?
All right. I'm next. So hello, everybody. My name is Carolyn Ritterman, and I'm the Vice President of Global Customer Care at Stryker. We're a $14 billion med device organization based here in the US, but operating in 75 countries around the world. So my responsibilities are really similar to both Roy and Robin's in the fact that I've got a service team here in the US and also in Europe. Really responsible for everything post-market as well. So we have field service operations, tech support, installation services, and then depots or repair workshops in several different regions. And then we have a customer service organization on the new order entry side as well. I've been with Stryker for over 20 years, but only in the service industry for just over one. So still learning a lot from my peers. And one of the things that I find is so special about the service space is really just the people and the connection to our customers and to the products that we serve. And so as you think about how do we continue to build loyalty, how do we continue to think differently about providing service and adding value for our customers, innovation is really what comes top of mind. And so bringing people from different backgrounds, from diverse experiences, and creating an environment where we can welcome those people and those ideas and really help drive business results that obviously benefit the organization, but have tremendous impacts on our customers as well is really the why for me.
Thanks, Carolyn. And I got so excited, I forgot to introduce myself. I am Mairead Ridge. I'm the VP of Marketing at Aquant. So really excited to have you all with us and looking forward to a really great, impactful discussion today. And before we start the conversation, I wanted to level set around the service industry and the obstacles it has overcome when it comes to diversity. So for example, according to the US Department of Labor, 4% of service technicians are women, 73% are white, not Hispanic. And, the clients that we work with often talk about the challenges of recruiting younger generations into service roles. And in fact, stats show that 35% of the service workforce is 55 plus. And there are concrete benefits to diversity. So McKinsey, according to McKinsey, the most ethnically diverse companies are 35% more likely to outperform their peers. And so one of the topics that I know the panelists are going to delve into today is that, diversity is about more than hiring people from underrepresented identities. It's about fostering a culture that's inclusive and making sure that everyone on the team feels valued and accommodated. And I think I love this term of workforce belonging because a study from Forrester showed that when people feel that sense of inclusion and belonging in their workforce, there's actually a 55%, 56% lift in job performance, and it also decreases turnover risk. So let me ask our panelists, do these stats resonate with you?
I would say I would say they do, right? I think especially when you talk about belonging, right? When people feel like they're a part of an organization, whether it's, whether you find commonality through, being ex-military, through regions, previous work experience, or whatever it is, when people feel like they belong within a culture of an organization, then you get more of that like loyalty and attachment from those employees. And so that also, breeds a diverse group when they have more to connect and culturally identify with within an organization than some of the more, I guess, some of the more high level demographics.
Mhm. And are there, sorry, go
And
ahead.
I'll say to your point, Roy, I think that, really establishing a sense of belonging is for everyone, and it allows everyone to kind of bring their best self forward. And it doesn't happen overnight. I think a lot of times we try to fast forward and think that everybody is going to belong from the very beginning, and that's just not how it works within just the intuitive nature of it. So to your point, I think that the statistics are pretty spot on.
Totally agree.
So I think it's important to start by defining what we're talking about when we talk about diversity, and also the term diversity, equity, and inclusion, which I think we hear a lot, but maybe other different organizations define this differently, and some, quite frankly, probably don't have a definition for what it means. So I wanted to ask our panelists, does your company have a definition of diversity?
So I can go first on this one, Mairead. Stryker does have a definition for diversity, and I would share just our CEO is very passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, and really how that all ties with talent. The work environment, the culture that we have, and obviously results for our customer. So much so that is actually captured in our annual report from 2020, which I was super excited to see. But from a diversity perspective, we've defined that as really bringing together unique individuals. And we've had a lot of conversations within my leadership teams around, what is unique? How do you define it, right? And really, as you kind of take a step back, being able to talk about everything that makes us different, everything that you can see, and all of those things that you can't see as well, and really starting to get in touch with those and understand what those mean and the value that they can add to your team.
And what about, is there a distinction that's made in your companies between the idea of diversity and diversity, equity, and inclusion? And how are you defining those two things? Roy, how about you?
Yeah, so for us, we don't actually have a specific definition of diversity, right? In our core values, we emphasize collaboration, communication, clarity, and competence. And so in that kind of, one in clarity, one in collaboration, encouraging connectivity across groups. One thing that I found that we did as an organization, on top of having, obviously hiring practices that are equitable, doing pay equity evaluations on a recurring basis, but it was also defining what's not acceptable within our culture. So when we did the last revision of our handbook, we actually made it very clear what like behavior and like harassment or things like that would not be allowed with any organization, right? So in the whole thing about being inclusive and being equitable and making sure people are treated fairly, it's also making sure that we define how people are not treated, right? And things that are not acceptable. So like discrimination, harassment, certain language, and things of that nature as well. Are emphasized. So it's, so that again, we have a culture and we have a work environment that's safe, right, where people can express themselves and feel like they can be diverse, right, without having to deal with any responses or retaliation or negativity. So I think that's one thing we did, right? So it's like what you want diversity to look like, and diversity would vary depending on the people that come in. But I think we did a good job, or our HR department did a good job of defining what's not acceptable within our culture. That would obviously be an obstacle or a barrier to having people who were diverse, or who would feel excluded, right, because of certain language or terminology, or just behavior that's accepted within the organization.
Makes sense. And I think the topic of how to make everybody feel included and how to, you know, adapt the culture to everybody's perspectives, we're going to delve into a lot today. I think the first step that can be challenging is getting that alignment at the leadership level, right? Like, how are we going to create the handbook? How are we going to set the objectives? So, curious, and Robin, maybe you have a perspective here on how do you get alignment across the leadership team about diversity and about those definitions and those plans for putting together, a culture that's equitable and diverse.
Sure. At Mevion, we definitely have a commitment to diversity. We're very committed on creating and maintaining a workplace in which the employees have the opportunity to participate and contribute. We feel that our human capital is the most valuable asset we have. So we look at the collective sum of the individual differences and experiences and knowledge that everyone brings to the table and how they can invest their efforts into their work. And that's a representative part of not only our culture, but our reputation and the company's achievement. So we are a multinational corporation with a mix of cultures in our organization, and we're growing globally, which is exciting for us. We sponsor a lot of internships. We do a lot of mentoring within the company. And from the top down, our CEO she's very much a strong role model and really showing her highly invested persona with ensuring that we have top quality employees and candidates coming into the company, to the point that she individually interviews every single individual that's coming through, that gets to the point of, that next level where we're thinking of hiring. So I think it shows her commitment, and that starts the top down, and we kind of role model that as well as leaders. I have a great group of a management team that really devotes time into, focusing on the technical component of making sure we're having the right candidates. We look at all of our candidates, but we really want the right candidates for the skill set that we're offering. So,
sense. And you've all mentioned that you're leading global teams, right? So I'm curious about how this conversation happens across global leadership teams, where different cultures approach diversity and inclusion differently, right? Like like the U.S. has its own history and culture and makeup. So, Carolyn, do you have a kind of perspective? I know Stryker's a huge global corporation.
Absolutely. I would say that from an organizational perspective, we are absolutely focused on DE&I around the globe. I think to one of the key points we talked about earlier, right? Like, it means something different depending on where you are and where you come from and what the work is in front of you. So definitely a focus here in the US for sure with our teams, and our organization within Global Customer Care has built some pretty robust plans. It does look and feel a little different when I shift over to my European team, because that team consists of people from all different races, ethnicities, from different countries. They speak different languages, they have different backgrounds. And so innately they're a more diverse organization as it is. So adapting those plans and making sure that it fits with the values of those teams, that it aligns with what we're trying to do with our customers, and keeping that at the forefront, and really driving, regardless of which region in the world you are. We want to be a talent destination for the best talent, whatever that talent looks like, wherever they came from. We want the best here at Stryker. And so how do we make that environment attractive to all of those best talent people?
Right. Another question I want to dig in on is, so it sounds like your organization's, at the very top, there are values around and planning around diversity, equity, and inclusion. As leaders of service teams, how do you take that vision and apply it to your org? And is it slightly different how you're approaching it as a leader on your team versus across the organization? Roy, do you have something you want to add there?
Sure. I think that as leaders in any role, right, regardless of the span of leadership, like if we find value and we think that diversity and inclusion is important, then we have to also show that in our behavior. And I know in some of our pre-calls I discussed, right, like as the person who ultimately gives HR the green light, on a candidate, like if we want diversity, then we need to make sure that we at least have a diverse pool of candidates. Right. And if we don't have a diverse pool of candidates, then what in our recruitment process, right? What in our net, if we want to put it in, right? Like we're throwing a net out there. but like, where are we casting it, right? What are we catching versus what we're choosing to keep? So I think we have to take a lot of responsibility as leaders in the organizations who ultimately make the decisions on whom we hire, to say that, okay, we want a diverse pool of candidates. So if we need to change our job description, if we need to change our job posting, if we need to change where we typically recruit from, then we have to hold ourselves to that, right? Because if we keep getting presented a homogenous group of candidates that lack diversity, and we keep hiring from that same group, then we're not really enforcing, or we're not reflecting the behavior that we as leaders claim we want. So I think we've got to take responsibility for that and make sure that we're creating a net, right, that catches a more diverse group of candidates, and then we hold our managers accountable to hiring the best candidate based on our culture, based on our our training capabilities, and what the needs of our customers are.
And that's a great transition into our next our topic around recruiting diverse teams. So Roy, I have a follow-up question there. So are you setting goals around diversity in hiring, or how are you approaching that from a sort of goals perspective when you're looking to create a more diverse team?
Yeah, so and I don't know if we mentioned this, but like I came across a diverse team by accident, right? I didn't have an assumption that my team wouldn't be diverse, even though I inherited and came in to an organization that wasn't diverse, right? So I didn't really evaluate it and say we need to diversify this thing. I really was looking like we need the best candidates, right? We need the culture, and we need the people who have both the technical and behavioral capabilities to be successful at what we do. And when we stopped focusing on experience, when we stopped hiring people, just based on where they worked at previously, or it was easy for us to train them, the result of that, right, was that we had a more diverse team. So when we lowered our experience requirements, for instance, when we removed having an associate's degree as a requirement and a bachelor's degree preferred, when 99% of our employees had no associate's degree. Right. So there were even things in our job description, or in our requirements, that we weren't even meeting with our existing employees. So when we stripped some of that stuff away, the candidates that started to apply were more diverse, right? We started getting more people. We started getting more women to apply, more minorities to apply, more millennials and Gen Xers to apply, because it was just available to them. So when we adjusted that, like I said, we kind of adjusted that net. And we were casting in the same place, but then we were pulling in different candidates in the same management team with the same objectives and the same culture that they were trying to perpetuate, hired diverse people just naturally, right? And I mean, I'll be honest, it was surprising to me when I see the names that are coming across, and I'm like, I can tell that we're hiring people from different backgrounds. I can tell we're interviewing women, when that wasn't something we had previously. And I didn't set a goal or an objective, but I gave my managers a broader catch, so to say, from a candidate pool. So they had a more diverse candidate pool. And when we hired the best people from that candidate pool, we wound up with a more diverse service organization, a more diverse software organization, and a more diverse technical support call center team as well.
And Marie, I'll jump in there as well. Like, Roy, love your and we've used this fishing analogy a little bit, with what fish are you trying to catch? How do you make sure you're looking in all of the right places, and then how do you catch the right one? I'm not a fisher person, so I probably bungered that up somehow. But I think going back to the job requirements is a key thing, and we've seen just even in the past year, like the ability to work remote versus come into the office has been one that's really, really easy to highlight and say, hey, you just opened up, the whole country, as opposed to saying everybody has to live in Kalamazoo, Michigan, right? Which gets you just a very different population of people. I think the other piece I would just kind of piggyback on is we haven't set like firm targets around, gender mix or anything like that. But we do have a very analytical, people like scorecards and results and want to be able to track progress. And so just within our leadership team, we've built out kind of like a behavioral scorecard. So to give people something to kind of march to that says, hey, you're going to partner with your recruiter and you're going to, evaluate the job description. You're going to make sure that you're looking at different schools, if it's an entry-level position, or different organizations to recruit from, you're going to have a diverse interview panel. And so don't just bring the 3 people you work closest with, go pull people from other parts of the organization and look that way. And then, like I said before, we always hire the best talent for the job, but we're really holding ourselves accountable to the behaviors to make sure that selection process we were casting the net wide and did get the best of the best.
So it sounds like there are 2 important criteria in widening the scope of the candidate pool, right? One is making sure that the job descriptions don't have bias in them. And then the second part around that behavioral scorecard. So that's specifically, Carolyn, for the hiring managers, right? Or the people that are making the decisions. So there's like an element where you need to check bias around that kind of, around the people that are selecting candidates too, right? So really interesting. And what about casting the net into different places where you didn't before? Roy, you said even changing the job description meant you could still look in the same places and find a more diverse candidate pool. Curious if either Robin or Carolyn, you've had, tried unconventional approaches to finding candidates that helped you diversify.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just had this conversation with my management team yesterday, because we recruit for a highly technical skill set in the semiconductor industry, and oftentimes we recruit from, what Roy spoke to earlier, the Navy nuke programs or the military programs. And so I'm always kind of challenging my management team to look outside the box. And there are so many individual and candidates that have expertise in other areas and may not be semiconductor industry, but they have the skill set and the personality to be able to adopt best practices and learn. And it's a matter of recognizing the proper candidates that come to the table. They have the behaviors that you can mentor and develop. Oftentimes you can train certain skills, but it's harder to train the soft skills. So I think that, hiring goals sometimes boost the diversity numbers, but they don't automatically kind of create an inclusive culture. When I talk about diversity, I always say diversity is kind of being invited to the party where inclusion is being asked to dance. And so oftentimes we think of diversity and inclusion, and sometimes it's disproportionate to the employee pipeline. And I think even more so, the employee experience continues far beyond the offer letter. And so to retain and nurture the top talent, it's really critical to kind of take an honest look at the end-to-end employee experience with an eye towards creating the conditions in which promotes the inclusion kind of on a daily basis, and designing ways to measure that impact within an organization. To Carolyn's point, having behavioral evaluations and really looking at the individuals and what they bring to the table.
That's great. And I just want to encourage the audience, if you have questions or experiences that you want to share in chat, like for example, any kind of methods that you've been successful in diversifying your team, whether it's new approaches to hiring or changes to the job description. I love the emphasis around that you've all kind of brought to the surface around looking for soft skills. I think a lot of the companies within the industry are really looking for very specific criteria, right, around what kind of hard skills you need to be successful as a technician in a given field, right? But what have you found in sort of, I mean, I don't know if loosening the requirements is the right term, but in putting that emphasis in soft skills, once you get people on board, has it changed like your training methodologies to have a pool of people that might not have the same level of experience? Just curious to hear about that.
Yeah, I'll speak first on that. So, first of all, Navy nukes are awesome because I am one. But yeah, I think we had to just noticing, but I think a lot of us, right, especially when you work in, as Robin mentioned, and even with Stryker, with Carolyn, most of us have equipment that you wouldn't get trained on at any vocational school or university, right? So like if you studied electronics, you're not going to come across pharmacy automation equipment or, radiation technology and semiconductors, right? Like you're not going to come across that. So I think we've always had rather robust training programs, knowing that we sell proprietary equipment and not commodities. But like we didn't really adjust our hiring to know that. So that's one reason why a lot of organizations look for field service in the military, because what the military tells you is that somebody can be trained on how to operate something they've never seen before. because everyone who joins the military wasn't doing, doesn't wind up doing after training what they were doing before they got in, right? I'm a business education major that wound up operating nuclear power plants. So it's like I wasn't like a physics major or an engineer, I wasn't even an engineering major. And I think that's why that helps. But I don't think a lot of organizations give enough credit or have enough confidence that they can train people with the right raw talent and aptitude. But it's mostly because we've just never tried it, right? Like we get people who do something similar and then we put them through the same program, which takes them from the beginning, from being a novice to being intermediate to being a master of it. So I think a lot of organizations have the training. We just really we were just assuming that people were coming in at kind of a medium threshold, where that same training program would apply to somebody who was new as long as they had the right behavior, they could learn and they could understand. And right. And again, I think that's something you can hire an engineer, somebody with a master's degree in engineering, like a friend of mine in new school, still went through the same classes that I did. It didn't matter. So even though we all came in at a different level, like when you have your training program built out to cover your equipment, your culture, and your organizational needs, I just feel like you get more out of it in that regard if you put it to use, right? So I think we can do it. Most of us just haven't tried, or it's new to us trying because the field was overpopulated with candidates. So we didn't really have to try it on new people because we had so many people that had experience that were going through the same program.
Right. I like that point. And basically, like you said, in other words, we don't all start out the same place. Some people start out to a disadvantage because they come from a different field with, less soft skills experience. And I know for my team and my field service engineers, we have two that are stationed on site all day long for our customers. And so they really are the face of our company. They are the face of the customer success. And so they are the true ambassadors. And it's teaching people to be able to speak to the customers on a friendly way, be able to understand and interpret, and also recognize that the technology is the customers. They purchase the technology, they own it, we're servicing it, and they pay us to service it. I think oftentimes we confuse that, thinking that it's our technology, and we can have the freedom or flexibility, but we have to stick to the contract, and we have to do things that enable folks to understand what they've been trained to do, what they're accountable for, what they're responsible for, really defining doing the right thing, even when no one's watching, when it comes to, the customer satisfaction service component and how that applies to just the inclusion of making folks feel that they really can bring their skill set to the table and help to demonstrate that for the companies we have as an ambassador.
Yeah, I think you both hit on something. Like, it's not just the technical pieces in our world that are important. There's like so many different themes that result in a great service technician or a service leader or any role within our organizations. And as you kind of going back just to the job descriptions and the job requirements again, as you kind of hone in on what makes a role successful, you're probably not going to find a person that ticks all of the boxes, but you're pulling from a diverse group of people that maybe tick 2 over here and 3 over here, and they're different. So really getting to know and understand the individual and what that person will require from a training, from an onboarding perspective to be successful. I mean, we have an example in our customer service team where historically we probably would have said that they needed to have X number of years of call center experience. We kind of scratched that, and we actually hired a call center leader who was the director of nursing at one of our customers. So knew nothing about our call center or how the telephones worked or any of those pieces, understood our customer really well, understood teams really well, and surrounded her with process and system experts, right, to help her be successful in the role. So there's just one recent example, kind of the top of mind, but there's so many different pieces. It's how do you balance all of those and then support each individual as they're on their journey to development and success.
There's Thank you. There's a great question that came in around if we, removing degree requirements was something I think that Roy brought up for job postings to increase diversity. It sounds like even years of experience within the specific field is something that Carolyn, on your side, that you've also removed in order to make hiring feel more exclusive. Are there any other barriers that you all have removed from your job postings to increase diversity beyond those two?
Location is the other one. I mentioned that one earlier, but really thinking, does a person need to relocate or be in a physical building every day?
And I would say on top of removing things, it's just reading it to make sure it's still true, right? Because our jobs evolve over time, right? And so you may have needed a very mechanical inclination. Now most of your stuff is network driven and IT based, and it's Wi-Fi versus serial communication, right? So maybe your role, right? Maybe this role isn't 75% travel, it's really 15% travel. So I think we also need to stop being generic in our posting, and then also look at your posting compared to your best employees and see if it lines up, because that's what I found. Like, oh, like our ideal candidate looks like this, but my ideal employee doesn't meet any of the requirements and was like an internal transfer that came from our warehouse that didn't have any of those requirements, right? So I think we just have to look over time as our positions evolve, our technology evolves. To Carolyn's point, right? Like as the dynamic of work evolves, right? Now it's remote. So what requirements do I need for someone who was remote versus that? And a lot of times we're posting job descriptions that are 6 years old, right? That are even, some of them are reflecting technology we don't even use anymore. We just haven't updated the description. So I think reviewing it and comparing your ideal candidate to like your best employee, or some of your best employees, right? A diverse group of employees, and making sure that it lines up. Because I know when we did that, it did not. And we were like, why is all of this stuff in here? Because these aren't the kind of people we're hiring. And so more than likely, we're getting the people who are reading the job description and saying, oh, well, forget it, I'll apply anyway. And we're like, we love that person and we hired them, but they didn't even apply because they met the requirements on the job description. So then we started peeling that stuff away, and it really helped.
There's a comment that just came in that's talking about using technology as part of the recruitment process. So diversity, recruiting software, and artificial intelligence to shortlist candidates, for example. Curious if you all have experiences with that kind of technology and what those experiences have been like.
I'm not aware that we're using any of that. I mean, it could be happening at some part of the organization, but within our team, we're not using anything in that space.
Interesting. So the person who commented would love to hear more about your experiences with that, and maybe what specifically you found helpful. And there was another question that came in around how are you testing for soft skills as part of the interview process?
It's interesting because for our interview process, we have a technical panel of the service managers who sit through a lengthy, very technical interview, and they kind of vet the person just in regards to the background, their skill sets, their ability and what they think that they will bring to the table. And then kind of if they get through that first interview process successfully, they come to me and I'm more of the soft skills interview. And it's interesting because you can really learn a lot about someone when you just ask those situational questions. And I think that some candidates come to the table prepared and some do not. And I think there's such a wide berth of questions that you can ask to really understand the person's beliefs and what they're going to offer and how they're going to help support the inclusion and diversity within the organization. And then once they go through my interview, once they pass, I guess you should say, they go to HR, they go to our COO, they go through the process of interviewing with our CEO. So it's quite lengthy, but it's interesting because each person that we have incorporated into the interview process also brings something different to the table. So we're able to really extract and understand a well-rounded version of that person, that candidate. And that's why I think we feel, very confident when we get to the hiring stage that, it's a superb candidate and that they're going to be a good fit for the role, organization, and that we're a good fit for them as well. That's really important for us. We want to make sure that we're the organization that they want to truly work for. And I think that's important as we all go through those hiring and recruiting processes.
Really interesting. Roy, you mentioned that you use a behavioral assessment, both for hiring and sort of ongoing team management. Would be curious to hear about how that works in regards to the hiring process.
Yeah, so for our process, and kind of to both what kind of Carolyn and Robin, the reason we originally introduced this, because I felt like my team was not well equipped enough to ask the right kinds of questions, right? So I think everybody Googles like the 10 best behavioral questions to ask during an interview. And everybody asks, what's your 2 greatest weaknesses? And my weaknesses are my strengths, right? Like it's that whole thing that everybody kind of gets prepped for. So what I tried to find was a tool that allowed us to give very specific behavioral questions to candidates based on their personalities, right? So we found a tool called Parent, and that's essentially what it does. It's a behavioral assessment tool that you can use for hiring readiness and coaching and mentoring and a lot of things. But what it gives you is questions to ask somebody based on kind of where their profile fits in the behavioral assessment. And then we found that to be, I called it, and I've done a couple of different speaking engagements on it. I call it cracking the interview facade, right? Because there's like people come into an interview, they're prepped, they're ready, they know how they're going to answer their behavioral questions. They have their favorite customer story that they're going to tell to show how they care about the customers. And one of those things that, one of the questions that we had that I always thought was interesting is it asks you, can you tell me of a time where basically you solved the customer problem, but you got in trouble for it, right? So it's like, and it's actually a measure of care and supportiveness. So like, are you too supportive where you will break company rules to do something for a customer? And you'll be surprised how many people like happily tell me they broke the law or broke company policies or gave stuff away for free that wasn't supposed to, or lied to their boss because they didn't want their, and it was like, they just say it openly because like you're tapping into something that they're passionate about and they're giving you an honest answer. And sometimes that honest answer is in their favor. Sometimes it's not. Because you're like, I don't want you to be supportive to the point to where you violate all of our processes, especially working in healthcare, that you could be breaking some things that are required from an FDA or reporting perspective. So in that, I think that was the main thing for us. So once we got to have more open and transparent interviews for candidates, we had a better idea of who we were hiring. And the other thing is, it doesn't mean you're hiring a perfect person, but even in the areas where they're flawed or where you may need development, you already know where those areas are. So the manager can say, you know what, this guy he might be horrible at work-life balance. His vitality is going to be off because he'll work 80 hours a day. But then I'm going to take that on as his boss and as his coach to make sure that we get him a better work-life balance. So it allows you to see a fuller picture of the employee so you can make a conscious decision as the hiring manager. Like, I know where some of the good areas are. I also know where some of the bad areas are. But am I willing to invest the time in those bad areas because the good outweighs some of those bad areas? And then from an ongoing perspective, as someone mentioned, we give that same assessment every year. Because people, one, are taking it before they get hired, and it's their idea of the job versus when they're physically in it. And as people get promoted, they take it as well. So someone will take it as a technician, they take it as a supervisor, as a manager. Like I've taken it as a manager, a director, and as an executive, and as a member of our senior leadership team. My profile changes every time I take it because my role was changing and the behavior that I need to be successful in that role was different. So that's one of the things that we've used, and it helps to keep that ongoing process because it gives the manager, okay, like they were excellent in these areas, but they were weak in these areas. So make sure you keep an eye on them and develop them in those areas. And that helps with voluntary, that helps with retention, because then you don't have people who are leaving because you're terminating them because of behavioral problems. Because our issue was we were terminating people because of behavioral problems, not technical competency, not administration, but behavioral problems was our biggest retention risk to our company.
And so the tool that you're using, are the questions that you're asking kind of customizable to Swisslog? Like, have you developed the questions, or they're sort of based on criteria for service jobs across different industries? Just curious about how that works.
Yeah, so the questions themselves are interview questions just based on the behavioral attribute, right? But you ask different questions depending on, so like the questions are stock. So there's 3 questions or 4 or 5 questions for commonality. But you're not going to ask, but there are 225 attributes. So out of those 225, I may ask behavioral questions from 5 from one person, and then 3 for another person. So it kind of varies depending on what areas are kind of highlighted in their assessment, whether positive or negative. But the questions themselves are standard. So in that way, you're also not kind of discriminating. I don't ask Carolyn a different question about commonality than I would Robin, right? Or that they would me. Like, it's the same question if I'm talking to you about the same attribute, but every person doesn't get asked the same question because it's based on the attributes that are highlighted in their individual behavioral profile.
And I love the idea that the tool is there to assess and help the manager give feedback and coach, right? Like, as opposed to sort of eliminating candidates necessary from hiring criteria. I know there's a lot of software out there that companies use, for example, that can eliminate candidates completely based on the way they answer questions, which itself, like studies have shown that can actually create bias too. So the idea that there's assessment that can help you understand where the candidates are and work with them on behaviors, I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing and let Carolyn go. One clarifying thing: we only give our assessments to people who have already been identified to interview. We don't give the assessment to every applicant for that exact reason, right? So you're already identified to get an interview, and I don't give you the behavioral assessment until you've gone through the initial screening, your resume has been reviewed. So nobody is ever eliminated from an interview based on our behavioral assessment, because we didn't want to have that potential bias before people even got an opportunity to get screened through. So, yeah.
Yeah, I was just going to chime in. We partner with Gallup and have for years, for the whole time I've been at Stryker anyway, on kind of the interview process. And I would say, I think it's just important to remember that these are all tools, right? And the magic comes in how you leverage those tools. So whether it's to bring people into your organization, how you continue to coach and develop. And I would pile on just from a process perspective. One of the things that we found to be really interesting, a lot of times you just have a hiring manager or a hiring team going through the interview process. We've really widened that out to think about the whole value stream and the upstream and downstream partners that they're going to be working with as well, to really get not only how is this person going to behave, in the field with a customer, as an example, but what about when they're calling in for equipment to be shipped, or they're following up on a complaint. All of those pieces around how does this talent plug into the process? And then again, what are those behaviors that are going to be super strong strengths that we want to lean into and leverage? And where are those areas that we might need to coach and develop, assuming that candidate comes on board?
I'm curious, because we don't have that for our system. So I'm curious for Carolyn and Roy, have you ever gone through this process and put them through the system, and then you hire them and they kind of proved the system wrong? They weren't what the system kind of said that they would be. And has it kind of ever been faulty and failed?
So, yeah, it has. And then, so the other thing too is based on, we establish what we call, with Parent does anyway, it establishes kind of like a profile for your ideal behavioral candidate. But that profile is actually based off of surveying your existing employees, right? And we all know that even our best performers at work still have some bones in the closet, right? So there's some behaviors we don't see that may be negative as well. And so what we also do is that if we hire somebody that looks like they fit the profile and then they wind up being the wrong fit, or even if they resign, right? They're like, I just don't feel this job. I don't think it was for me. We go back and we compare the areas, because the gold standard is what we refer to it as. Out of 225 attributes might be a score range for 17, right? So it's not all, because you can't possibly do that, right? It's statistically impossible. So there's normally a core group. And then what we found, there was one attribute we found that wasn't originally in our model, that if somebody had a score of like less than a certain range, like it would be very hard for them to work in our industry. And it was a score called commonality, because if it was, so they could be supportive, they could be coachable, but if they couldn't listen to somebody describe something and find commonality, right? Like if they had a very low commonality score, which means it's hard for them to perceive and understand other people's opinions, then they normally quit or they were really bad at engaging in critical situations. And you wouldn't notice it until something bad happened and the customer's describing a problem or they're arguing with engineering. but it was because it was hard for them to understand other people's opinions. And so what did we do? We took commonality and we added it into our standard. And we also evolve our standard based on our top performers, because like at 5 years ago, like a third of my top performers, like half of them are retired, right? So we also look every couple of years at what our top performers look like, because the organization changes, the technology changes, the dynamic changes, and then we reestablish that goal. So it's kind of an ongoing process that we always check as well. So every time somebody leaves, the first thing we do, whether it was voluntary or involuntary, is look at their assessment and see like, what did we miss something? Or sometimes it just wasn't a good job fit, right? Somebody think they wanted to be on call 24 hours a day and their spouses disagree or their lifestyle disagrees. So they leave and go somewhere else. So we find more now, a lot of our attrition honestly is about job fit. It's not about performance or behavior. Like the demand of healthcare, especially in the midst of a pandemic, people just don't want that kind of job. It's not that they weren't good at it. And that's a lifestyle decision people have to make either way. But yeah, we check it and we evolve it. And it's not 100%, but I mean, it reduced our attrition by like 75%. So
I think it's an amazing approach. I want to transition. I think we could talk about recruiting, like I could talk about recruiting all day. I love this topic, but I want to make sure we cover sort of culture building, which we've certainly touched on, but I think there's some, some specific questions I want to ask here. One is, okay, so you've defined your values as a company and you have a vision and you're working on bringing in the right people. Now, once people are on the team, how do you set expectations around those behaviors that are in accordance with how you want people in your culture to behave? How are you rewarding and the good behavior and coaching or even disciplining the behavior that isn't aligned? Robin, I know you have perspective on this one.
Sure. So I think it's all about, for us as well, developing trust amongst the team and trust amongst the organization, and really setting the expectations and realigning. We are kind of a transitional team right now. Again, we're small. I'm new to the management team and leading the service organization, and we really just tried to really align on the expectations of the team. And I talked about in one of our previous discussions that we've had, the book from Netflix, the No Rules, and not accepting brilliant jerks. People can be brilliant and very competent and excellent with everything that they do, but if they're not a nice person, they're not going to work well with others, and that's going to obviously fold over into the customer experience and the customer satisfaction. So we really try to foster the environment of being nice, be respectful, hear people out, looking at mentoring folks and seeing where their needs are, and not tolerating bad behavior and holding peers accountable, holding each other accountable amongst the company and the teams. And I think that really builds a sense of trust. And at the end of the day, that's what we're really trying to do, is forge a sense of belonging amongst individuals that have different cognitive styles, different backgrounds, demographics. And I think that really builds the trust, and that helps to set expectations around behaviors. A simple thank you goes a long way. Obviously, incentives and merit bonuses do too, but I think, being in the environment where you say thank you to your peers and you recognize them for the help that they provide is really important.
And how do you assess whether that sense of belonging, people feel it across diverse identities? Do you have, and this is a question really for all of you, do you have ways of measuring it concretely, or is it more about kind of conversational check-ins with your leadership team? How are you doing that?
Yeah, we've got a couple different strategies, some more formal and some definitely more casual. So I mentioned from a recruiting perspective, we partner with Gallup. We leverage them for employee engagement surveys as well. And so this year, as an example, we're kicking off a pulse survey that'll happen twice this year, and then we're doing the traditional Q12 engagement survey. both avenues to capture feedback at the individual and at the team level around how our employees are feeling about their work environment, how committed to the mission and the culture they are, and really understand where those opportunities are for improvement. Again, those are tools, right? And the magic comes in what do you do with those? And so it's really that one to run. Robin talked about building trusting relationships. The relationship between the manager and employee is absolutely critical, and having that trust and transparency and that support and that relationship is key. And then I think making sure that we're talking about all of these pieces as well. So whether it's in town halls or team communications or wherever those appropriate venues are, that we're setting expectations around what's the leadership intent here, what's the culture we're trying to create, and why are we trying to create that, and then be able to facilitate and foster those conversations around how are we doing. I know for me and my organization, my next level leaders and I engage with all of our employees at least twice per year, where we're getting together in small groups and just having a chat around how are things going? How is it working from home? How is it going into a customer account? What can we do better? What do I need to do differently? And again, providing those avenues for people to communicate, to express what's going well and where we have opportunities are keys. And then if you can grab some, nuggets of information out of some of those surveys, it gives you a great opportunity to ask directed questions in a one-on-one setting or in a team meeting and really drive the dialogue within the members of the team as well, not just with the manager.
I love it. Another topic I wanted to dig in on, was building development plans for your employees that are inclusive regardless of their life stage or disability or other kind of categories of diversity. So curious about how you're thinking about that, how to retain employees long term if there's some kind of change in their life. Roy, I know that you had you've done some thinking and some planning around that.
Yeah, and so from a start on that, I think the main thing is that I do mentoring like internationally, so even in my personal life, but I think one of the problems is we have at companies we kind of have a path that we want people to go, and then we try to push them to the next step or the next stage or the next logical progression. And it actually takes more effort for managers or supervisors to get to know employees individually and figure out where they want to go, right? Like, so for instance, I had a technician in the field who wanted to become a lawyer, right? So like our development plan was availability to make sure in minimizing travel to make sure he could finish his degree so he could become a lawyer. He's not our lawyer. He became a lawyer, right? I have somebody right now going to school who is, going to school for data science, right? So like trying to manage their schedule to make sure that they can hit their lab and that they're not missing that course. So I think development has to be, what is your goal is to develop that person. And ultimately, you hope there's an opportunity internally. But when people are diverse and when you have people from different backgrounds that have different passions, you may also be developing people out of your organization, even into another organization laterally or into another career in general, right? So I think it's having that conversation with the employees, asking where they want to be developed. And I always tell my management team, discipline plans can be assigned. Development plans need to be agreed upon, right? You can't tell somebody you want to develop them into management or supervisor when they don't want it, right? That's just a waste of your time and a waste of theirs. But yeah, just come to an agreement of areas where they want to improve, some ideas of where they may want to go in the future. And some of it may, I've got a lot of people who are in the latter stages of life who want to retire. And their main thing is they want to be at home more often. All right. So what can we do to keep you in your area and use your skill set to leverage you training some of our junior technicians? Or what knowledge do you possess? Can we have you write down and spend some days just writing knowledge articles, and we won't have you out on the road? So I think it has to be individual. It needs to be agreed upon. And we have to accept the fact that there are going to be times where we have to develop people out of our organization because that's what's best for that employee.
Yeah, you bring up a point around service technicians and the lifestyle of travel can be challenging. Is that something that Robin and Carolyn, you look at as part of employee development? Like, do you have people transitioning, let's say, from the field into customer support roles? And how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, we're definitely flexible. We've just implemented a field service engineer development plan, like a ladder in which they can advance from FSC level 1 as a novice all the way up through level 4. And at level 4, it's more of a management role. The expectations change, obviously. This is something that, I did in the clinic even whenever I was a radiation therapist. I know that the folks have done this in the military with qualifications. And I think that that's going to afford folks a lot more of an opportunity to control and have a choice in their professional development. We all have those that want to just clock in and out, and we have those that want to grow and develop within the organization and take on more responsibility. So I think, our development plan will be good for our teams and looking forward and moving forward and thinking about what opportunities are out there, but not limiting to people to their success based upon their tenure. It's more talent based.
Yeah, Maureen, I would say very similar to both what Robin and Roy shared. I mean, we call them IDPs, individual development plans are owned by the individual. And I can speak for myself, mine has changed over a 20-year, period of time. And there's different priorities in life and different things that I aspire to do. And so, we've made that really a focal point that every teammate owns their development plan, and the leadership team here and your teammates are here to support you and make sure that we're aligned on what those opportunities look like for you to help reach your goals and be successful.
That's great. Thank you so much. We only have a couple of minutes left here. I did see a great question come in that was around, okay, so how are you thinking about recruiting more women into the field service profession? How do we increase that percentage from 4%? Curious if anyone has been looking at that metric specifically and have ideas about how to increase it there.
See, I was waiting for either of the women to go first because I want to know. I need to know the secret. And so just from, again, like offers we've extended and feedback that we've gotten directly, one of the biggest challenges we've had, especially with working mothers, is travel requirements for field service can be restrictive. So that's why I've had more success hiring women in technical support, which requires the same level of technical expertise, but it's a stationary, and they can work remotely in different locations. So travel requirements seem to be an issue. And just from a recruitment perspective, in general, right, when it comes to all minorities, ethnic minorities and women, no one knows what field service is. So no one applies for those jobs. It is like a great career. I was a field service technician. I've been in it for 11 years, but it's not very well marketed, right? So we've got to figure out ways to just advertise the job more. But I think travel requirements play a big deal, especially when you have working mothers. But we're also not, we're marketing to a lot of ex-military. Honestly, like most people I know in field service, like 75% of their employees are ex-military. And we market to very specific trades in the military, which are also underrepresented of women. So like we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot. But I don't know. If anyone has an idea, please let me know, because we've been trying to do it. We have some women in field service, but it's definitely an underrepresented percentage. And we don't get applicants, right? So it's not even not hiring them out of, we might get 10 female applicants like a year for roles. So yeah.
Roy, I think it comes back full circle. Well done, Mairead, right to where we started the conversation, right? Of making sure we're clear on what do you need to be successful in the role, make sure we're not limiting factors and that we're casting that net wide. I mean, whether it's the job description, where you're looking, the travel requirement, all of those pieces, right? Check ourselves to say, is that really a requirement to be successful in the role? And if it is, then it is, right? And that's the way it needs to be. But if not, it allows us to cast that net a little bit wider.
Thank you. That's really great perspective. We're up against time, and I'm almost sorry to go because this has been such a great conversation. I've learned a lot from all of you during it, and really appreciate your perspective and your insights. And for everyone who's attending, thanks so much for your questions. So we will be, as I mentioned, sharing the recording. We'll also share a few resources. I need to get the name of that Netflix book. I haven't read that one, and we'll send the name of that out as well, so that we can continue the learning and development on this topic. That's so important. So thank you everyone so much. And hope to see you tomorrow at our last spring break event. And everyone on the panel, thanks again. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
You too. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.